to understand it or not. I mean, you don't have to. It's just,
Everybody's
it's
camped
just
out.
yes. Although there might be more people. It's fine. It's fine. All right. I think we're going to get started, and I'm sure we're going to have more people who are wet and cold coming in and receive some dryness as inspiration from Doc Searls. And it's my pleasure to introduce Doc Searls, and of course I think Doc has heard in many introductions that there is no need to introduce Doc Searls. So I'm gonna repeat that. But Doc is if you think in terms of thought leadership and the internet and the use of the internet, I think Doc is the thought leader with regard to the implications and the impact and the value proposition of the internet and the advances in technology with regard to a variety of sectors and with regard to people's lives. And most famously, of course, he is the author of a variety of books. The book that I think really put Doc on the map. I mean, not that you were not before at the map, was the
and the co-author, really.
And the co-author David, and is of course the Clue Train Manifesto, which has been seen as the manifesto with regard to how to think and about the impact of the internet and how it changes society and business. And I think that was really also for me an eye-opener to frame the impact of the internet in a manner that was not framed before. And I think that framing is where Doc is a master in. And I always say by framing you actually see new insights and you see new opportunities. And so thanks for providing that. And more recently, he is also the author of the intention economy. We've had a lot of debate about the attention economy, but Doc expanded the concept by focusing on intention. And I think this whole notion of intention, which quite often, of course, is also linked with this whole concept of prosumers and the fact that consumers become producers and that they ultimately have a more important role to play than just consuming was again a central feature of that element. He's a famous journalist. I don't know, Doc, whether you describe yourself as a journalist.
Yeah.
So he's of course a famous journalist and has also been recognized as a journalist in multiple occasions. And is also here a visiting, or was a visiting scholar.
I still am.
Still, but you're still with Jay. You're still with Jay. All right, okay. You still have it. So he is at home. So he's a visiting scholar here at the Arthur J. Carter Journalism Institute, together with Jay Rosen, where he is based at Studio 20, which is a very interesting initiative with regard to rethinking also journalism. Besides that, he has affiliations with the Berkman Center and with the Center for Information Technology and Society at the University of California. So, despite the fact that there was no need for an introduction, I still provided one. Anyway. And Doug is going to focus today on the concept of personal data and the value of personal data in a time of large debates about big data and privacy.
Thank you.
I think that's good.
Okay. I'm beginning to think my reputation exceeds me there. So I want to talk about these topics: independence and privacy, things that we value in a world of dependence and surveillance, because that's what we've built. In recent years, increasingly, this is the world in which our independence and privacy is constantly challenged. Independence should go without saying. We are independent human beings. Privacy is now controversial on the net. It's not in the everyday world. You know, this is privacy technology. We have doors, we have windows. These are shades. These come down. We can create privacy in physical space. It's very hard to create in virtual space, and it's an issue. So I want to start by looking at a rather typical way of framing the internet and what's going on there. This is from last year, I guess last December, in The Economist, very sober, centrist publication. Survival of the biggest, in this small print there says, oh yeah, the internet's warring giants. As if the entire ocean was this. And of course, we're just these little people here looking at this, and this is Apple, Google, Facebook, and Amazon. An interesting thing about these is that we actually pay Apple and we pay Amazon for things. I probably bought this on Amazon. The computer came from Apple. We don't buy much, if anything, from Google. We buy nothing from Facebook. We, in fact, are the products that they sell. And that is the surveillance industry, following people around in order to give them a better experience and better content and all that, is what those companies are about. And to give you a sense of the scale of the industry that they built, here are some views of their facilities. The two on the left are Facebook. This one here is Google's. That one is also Google's. That one is Microsoft's. Microsoft didn't used to be in this business very much. They are now. And there are many of these. This one here is in Finland. That one there, I think, is in the Northwest somewhere. I don't know where the others are. But Google has dozens of these things, and they're immense. They are on the scale of power plants. And they are, by the way, except for use of electricity, utterly unregulated, utterly opaque. Nobody knows really what goes on inside these things. Very interesting. I mean, if we think of these as utilities, they're essentially unregulated utilities. And I'm not arguing for regulating them necessarily yet, but it's an interesting thing to look at the scale of these as industrial creations. We look at the center one, the Google one. You can tell by the colors. Those are Google colors. That's inside their data center. And I was struck by this image because it's so much like, as a movie lover, so much like this image. Look at the difference. Do you remember what this is from? The Matrix, exactly. You know, so what Google's done in many ways, it's like the same. It's, you know, we have three guys instead of one. But what they're building is the machine world in which we live, and that we should. The assumption behind it is that we should consider this so normative and ordinary that we'd adapt to it and just have our lives delivered to us in a way because they know us so well. The idea is this sort of ultimate AI orgasm. We'll know you better than you know yourselves, right? That's sort of what that's about. And so we're building that. They're building that for us. And because of that, we've reached what I think is peak surveillance. Because I think that collapses. I think that can't last. I think the assumptions behind that are ludicrous, even though they are essentially ubiquitous and taken for granted. And as evidence for that, here's a cartoon that ran in the New Yorker just last month. Get me everything on everybody. It's conceivable. That's essentially what the NSA did. And it didn't show their facility. It looks just like those other ones, right? It's just a big thing in the desert, you know, in some place with low real estate values that nobody minds losing the land. Get me everything on everybody. So we don't like that, right? We tend not to like that. It hasn't, you know, lawyers will say, well, where's the harm? We need harm before we can do anything. And the harm is a kind of a creeping thing. It's happening gradually. The frogs are boiling slowly. Here's one bit of evidence. We bank with Chase, which is the bank that ate our bank, right? And if you go to Chase, and you have something called Ghostery installed on your browser. This is Ghostery. They give you a list of things that you've blocked. They've blocked globally, or you can block them selectively. And now, the idea is that they're spying on you here. They're looking at what you're doing. The DoubleClick is doing that, and Underdone, and DataLogix, and BlueKai, and Axiom. Now, if you're just going to their website, that's okay. All right. They found out you went to a bank. What's unusual about that? But this isn't the bank. This isn't there. This is looking at our statement. Now, can you imagine going into a bank and going into the vault and pulling out the drawer with your valuables in a safe deposit box and finding out there are electronics in there looking at what you're doing? That's going on now. And it's okay, for some reason, for them It's not okay with us. We get creeped out. We've moved into the uncanny valley here. We don't like it. So and the interesting thing is, if you wonder, okay, what's happening with this data? Well, the idea is to give you a better advertising experience. Well, there's a company here in New York called White Ops, and this ran an ad week in October of last year. Online ad fraudsters are stealing $6 billion from brands. You know, brands are the only thing that matter in their mind, not people. Branding, by the way, is a term that came from the cattle industry. When you think about that. A security firm, White Ops, claims 1 in 6 PCs are infected by bots. It's run by a guy named Michael Tiffany. He's a high school dropout from Sacramento, California. Very interesting dude. You should have him in here. And he spoke right after I did at an Interactive Advertising Bureau event last year here in New York. And they're like the top advertising outfit organization. And what he told them and what he told us privately is that's a very low number. That's his very conservative number. The number that's really true is over half. Over half the laptops in this room right now are, if you're on the net, are doing fake clicking for hackers in Russia and other places where they go to prosecute this kind of thing. That's going on now. And those bots are very hard to find and very hard to defeat. There are entire buildings in India and other countries who, if you pay them, will click on ads for you so you can collect money in the monoculture, which is the advertising stream that's running through Google and Facebook and other large companies. So that's going on. There's fraud. On top of that, if you look at the quality of the data, this is from, we showed Blue Kai before, but this is from Rapidly. It's another one of those. They had their pants pulled down by the Wall Street Journal repeatedly, and they finally said, okay, look, we will show you what we've got on you. You're a citizen, you're a person, come to us and we'll show you what we've got. You can remove anything, not correct it, because they don't really know who you are. You have no way of authenticating yourself. You can remove it. And this is just some of mine, but it's the first page. This many are wrong. You know, I didn't complete graduate school. I don't live there. I didn't live there for 12 years. Name my household income wrong. I'm married. I'm not single. How long we lived there. We actually own a house. The children in the household, 3 of them are over 40. They're not in the household, and the other one is 17. You just have to leave. So,
and your influencing score must be much higher.
I don't even know what that is.
Who knows? I don't even know what that is. 91 to 100. Out of what? For, you know, maybe it's out of 500 or 10,000 or nothing. It doesn't matter, actually. And they call us edit your information. And by the way, if you go there and you remove it, it goes right back in. Because they go right back out to Axiom and these others that have the wrong data on you. They're canonical. You're not. It changes, and they have you wrong. So not surprisingly, people don't like this, and so they take action against it. By far the most popular browser add-on and extension is AdBlock Plus, Disconnect, Abhin, Provoni. There's, we saw Ghostery that only follows tracking. But basically, people don't like this. And not only that, they don't like the ads either. And so right now, as of this year, according to PageFair, almost a third of all ads are being blocked worldwide. There's some countries, such as Austria, where it's over 50%. In the U.S., it's about average. Asia, for some reason, I don't know why, it was lower. But in any case, they're projecting 100%. If they just do a linear progression here, probably won't do that. It'll probably flatten out. But still, this is the market speaking. This is us talking. This is not the companies talking to each other. So Julia Angwin, who worked for the Wall Street Journal for years as a reporter there, she's now with ProPublica. When she left the journal, she had run something called What They Know. It ran from 2010 to 2012. It's at wsj.com/WTK. So it's still all there and very interesting stuff. And so she wrote this book that's a bestseller, you know, Dragnet Nation, A Quest for Privacy, Security, and Freedom in a World of Relentless Surveillance. These are little crosshairs on people in matrix colors. And they look a little bit like black from above, actually. But it's entirely prophylaxis. It's basically, how do you put umbrellas on all these people so they don't get hit by, so they don't get observed? How do you get some privacy? And her techniques include things like wrapping her phone in tinfoil, which she replaced with something called a Faraday bag, which she showed us at a party here the other week, where the more she studied this, the more paranoid she got about it, and decided she She would take every measure she could. So this is basically a how-to at a personal level to avoid relentless surveillance. But it's not very prescriptive for what we can do about it. I think that's what we'd like to talk about here. Now, if you're collecting your own data, you can do it with these kind of things. This is, a Fitbit belt clip, and they have the wristband too. So does Nike, that it gives when you put in your shoe. Mood Panda for following your moods. The Whipping Scale, that's from France. The Zio Sleep Monitor from Boston. They are now out of business, but a wonderful company. I like them a lot. Runkeeper. And this is DigiFit. DigiFit actually doesn't do any of these. It just integrates them, which is a nice thing. But it integrates them into their silo. So all of these are siloed. And we, so your heart monitor and your foot thing that measures your running and all these things, integrating them is a real bear. Not easy to do. And all of them basically have the same problem that we have with Google and Facebook and the rest of them, which is it's not ours. So if we step into the brick and mortar world now, we have problems like we did with Target, which is if you happen to be one of 110 million people who shopped in a 2-month period at that store, you had to replace your credit cards. We had to replace our credit cards. We don't shop there very much, but managed to hit that window. And it's a huge inconvenience for the individual, but it's also consistent with something the brick and mortar world has been doing for a long time, which is you outsource customer service to the customer, right? You now have self-checkout, right? You call them up and they say, please go to our website. They've mechanized the avoidance of actual human beings as much as they possibly can. And they've centralized it as well, and that is in fact the problem. The problem is centralization. And centralization is something we needed after Industry 1, the Industrial Revolution. We needed scale. We needed big business to scale. If you wanted to do scale, you're running a railroad, you're running a big department store, you're running an insurance company, you're running a service business. You had to scale, and you scaled it every possible way you could. And you did this by typifying your customers as a bunch of templates, and you did this by normalizing as much as possible the way you deal with mass quantities of people. We invented mass marketing to go with this. And the funny thing about this is that the internet was designed to solve that problem. And it was designed to solve that problem in 1962. That's when this guy, Paul Barron, at the very height of the Cold War, when you could count on your hands and feet the number of large computers in the world, and certainly the large number of large computers within the American government alone, all networking looked like this. And this guy studied networking. He was probably one of the first great network architects. And he thought about networks and thought, well, the phone company is designed like this. You've got AT&T in the middle, or you've got, Deutsche Telekom in the middle, or France Telecom in the middle, or if you're all of us knew a network is ABC, NBC, and CBS in those days, which were the few big television networks. They had one central location, and the programming fanned out to all these remote places where they were broadcast. And he thought, in order to protect this, in order to reduce, this has a very large, what they call an attack surface. You could, if you're thinking in defense terms, you think it's very easy to bring this down. But if you spread it out, if you decentralize it, which you call the second way to organize a network, that's better. There are fewer points of vulnerability, smaller attack surfaces. But his radical idea, his completely radical idea was, wait a minute, why don't we take every node on the network, make it independent, make it separate, and make all these connections optional, and make all these paths available, so if one gets taken out, all the others can be used. And why don't we just take this thing and build this out instead? And that actually sat around for several years before people started trying it and found that it actually worked quite well. And the TCP/IP, the internet protocol we use today, basically is on this model. It says you can pass packets anywhere between here, and they can be dropped, and we can put them together again at the other end. It's okay. We make the best effort between reaching between these. And that is the design of the internet. That is the underlying design of the internet. Now, a couple things about this. First, representing this in 2 dimensions isn't really enough, because the way the internet protocol works is that it puts us all at 0 distance from each other, functional distance. There may be some latency if you're Skyping to Australia or something, but it's not a lot. It's a functionally, we assume now that there's such a thing as 0 distance between all of us. I was born and grew up on the other side of the river over here, and we could look at the Manhattan skyline, but we're not allowed to call it on the phone because that was long distance, right? And it was like another country almost. And you don't call over there, and it's too expensive. That's gone. Distance is gone, and along with it, cost. This does not have cost built in. He didn't start out saying, "Let's see, we need to build for this." He didn't say that. He said, "No, we need to build something that's useful for every node on here." So if you take this thing and look at it in 3-dimensional geometric terms, what you have is what my friend Craig Burton, who is the genius behind Novell's success in the 80s, calls a giant 0, which is if all of us are a point on the surface of a hollow sphere, we can all see each other through the 3-dimensional 0 in the middle. It is a stupid network in the language of David Eisenberg, who wrote about that for AT&T when he worked at Bell Labs in the 90s, and he saw the internet coming, and he said, "You guys, his employers, are trying to build the intelligent network. What we have with the internet is a stupid network, but all the intelligence is on the outside." So you have this 3-dimensional 0, which we could illustrate this way, and where each of us is equal on this thing. We're all 0 distance from each other. And the important point about this is that the internet is in fact personal. For all of us, it's a personal thing. It's our internet. It's our way of connecting with everybody else in the world. It is not the phone companies. It is not the cable companies. It is not the governments. It is not anybody's any more than gravity is anybody's. And so it's as neutral as gravity, or the periodic table, or the weather, or sunlight. That it is nature. What Barron did with his design, what we did with ARPANET, what we did with the founding protocols of the internet and the main protocols we use, is we made our own nature and we're living in it. Now, I want to point that out because it's a policy question right now. Net neutrality is this policy question, but it's framed wrong. It's framed as a service. Gravity is not a service, and nor is the internet. We are in error when we talk about the internet as a service. A service may provide us with access to something that allows us to use these protocols that are burned into our computers and our phones and our other devices, but the phone company and the cable company and whoever else is providing the internet access to us is not in charge. It should not be in charge. And so I think we have a framing issue there that's very, very fraught at this point, in part because almost every way of conceiving it, I think, is at odds with the way it was designed in the first place. So let's just look at one year, 1995. In 1995, the internet, which had entirely been a privilege of the governments, large companies, and universities like this one, which had their own large nodes and were already using those protocols, because of the creation of ISPs, and because fathers of the net said, okay, let's go ahead and commercialize it, it's cool, we got dial-up. And because we had dial-up, we got stuck with something that looks like this. There's an architecture in the way we deal with websites, the way we deal with most of our mail systems and other things, where we are always the subordinate party. It's called client-server. We have the client, they have the server. Client-server was simply a way to organize responsibility for data and for what gets done. So let's let the servers do the heavy lifting, we'll be the clients, we'll dial in and we'll use their services. But the original idea was we would have the information superhighway. The browser would be our car, and we're going to drive around, we're going to browse to different places, but we're essentially independent. That's not what we ended up with. What we ended up with is, we're the calves, we go browsing at the cows, which are the websites, and they give us the milk of HTML and JavaScript and these things called cookies. And the purpose of cookies was to remember state, what you were doing the last time you were there. The cow is Amazon, you go to Amazon, they remember, oh, hi Bob, I recognize you, I've left you a cookie, We remember the state you were in the last time you were here. You bought these things. We've got all this stuff here. It was fine as far as it went, but then the cookies turned into spyware. So, and we all know how that's led. We've been stuck with this for 18 years. Breaking out of this, I think, is kind of job one. And part of breaking out of that is recognizing that our computers are far more powerful than they were when we could only dial up. Our connections, even though they're biased for downstream and biased for delivering content and all of that, we still have enough upstream capacity that we can have live phone calls and things. We should start thinking in much more symmetrical terms about what the internet is, and what it can do, and what we can build toward that. So I want to share some developments that we've had so far in the projects that I've been working on toward independence and privacy. I started a project called Project VRM at the Berkman Center at Harvard in 2006 when I got a fellowship there, and I was obliged to come up, as fellows were in those days, with a project. You're here to have a project. And because I wrote Clue Train, and because I saw Clue Train's imperatives not being obeyed or coming true at a pace that I would like, I thought, geez, I've also been an editor for Linux Journal for that time, about 12, 15 years, something like that. I knew how developers work, and I wanted to encourage development of tools that made us both independent but better able to engage. Let's start helping markets from the customer side, from the individual side. Let's start helping governance from the citizen side. So these are a few of the ones. I'm going to share 5 of them with you. The first is sovereign identity. The identities that we carry in our wallets are identifiers. They are actual identities, and they are administrative. That's Devin's observation. And he's been writing here at Moxie Tongue and tweeting it at NZN. Brilliant dude. He's a businessman. That's his business. It's actually a kid's electronic toy, DIY, maker kind of business. But his observation is there are 2 kinds of identity. There's administrative identities, which is what we think of as identity, and there's sovereign identity. And sovereign is who we know we are. Who we were yesterday is the same today and the same tomorrow, even if we're called different things by different people. I'm Doc to most of the world, but I'm David to my wife. I'm Dave to my sister. You know, I've been called worse when I was in junior high school. I fell asleep in class when he was sleepy. I've now been 2 of the 7 dwarves, I think. But Devin's point is that you were given an identity when you were born by your parents, but then you're in charge of it after a while, and that is, you know who that is. Being able to organize our presentation of ourselves behind a single pronoun, I, me, mine, is what we call sanity. Making ourselves sane, keeping ourselves sane in the world is really a critical thing. So there's work going on toward that. Personal clouds is another one. There's been lots of development by these companies, Personal.com, Emmett Global, they're here in New York, Respect Network, which I may talk about a bit more in a couple of minutes, around what had been called personal data stores and lockers and vaults as a place where we keep the data that's useful for us when we share it, like say our healthcare data, our financial data, our commercial data, whatever it might be. How can we govern that in a way that we control? The Respect Network, this is a conversation going on at personal-cloud.org, and they have a little logo they created. But the Respect Network is an organization that's both a company and a network of many companies and many individuals and many .orgs, all of which are looking to make these services substitutable. In other words, if you have, like you have a bank is substitutable. You take your money out of bank A and put it in bank B. A broker is substitutable. A real estate agent is substitutable. In the same way, you know, and all these things, you know, should be substitutable. Well, right now, for example, with the Internet of Things, those are not substitutable. You know, so we're talking about making that happen with substitutable services where you can move your personal data that's completely locked up and secure from one place to another. Another is truly private data and communications. We don't have this, for example, with email right now. Email is wonderful. It's an open protocol. It's based on an open protocol, but we are very exposed. If we have our data, if we use Gmail, Google is busy reading our mail and other people's mail as it passes through. That's not good. We have no confidence if we send mail that it cannot be intercepted or observed. So these guys, who are just fun guys from the UK, led by this guy, his name is Big Davy Salas. We're visiting in Santa Barbara a couple of weeks ago. Our permanent home is out there. And they've created a company called Credo. And the cool thing about Credo is that you can, using their technology, it's very low level, it's very open, you should be able to encrypt the data that you're transmitting and your communications between any 2 points. So they're solving at the very lowest level that particular problem. Intent casting is another. The ability to reverse the messaging in the marketplace so that you and I can broadcast in a very secure, anonymous, and effective way. Hey, I'm looking for a stroller for twins in Washington Square in the next 2 hours. I got $200 who's coming through, and not reveal any more about yourself than you want to. You can imagine a zillion different things for that. But where you become on the seller side a fully qualified lead, but without being subject to the spamming that tends to follow that or the sales pressure that follows it. But the marketplace will know the people who actually are exerting their demand. So that's called intent casting. And the last of these is the Internet of Medium-like things. This is Phil Windley. He's the former CIO of the state of Utah and a PhD computer scientist, teaches at BYU out there. And a real genius. Phil, who's at all of these and vets all of his thinking here, he wrote something yesterday called the CompuServe of Things, which is where we're heading with the Internet of Things. Internet of Things is a hot topic. You read about it all the time. It's not the Internet yet. It isn't because everybody's talking about it, wants to silo that data. There's going to be the Google of things, the Facebook of things, the Apple of things, and the AT&T of things, and so on. So Phil has written an operating system for things and for people that's completely open and abstract and not locked down in any way. And so it's pretty cool stuff. So he calls that the Internet of Medium Things. So I wrote about this in this book, The Intention Economy, When Customers Take Charge. And that was compressed by the request by the Wall Street Journal to 800 words. Oops, I just did something. Yep. I made it blank. I hit the wrong button. Oh, that's yours. Okay. I would not have chosen that title, nor would I have chosen that art, which looks like Dianetics to me. But nonetheless, they did. But that speaks about customers and not necessarily about citizens. Now, you guys at the GovLab have this thing called the Open Data 500, and this really interesting diagram that shows the Open Data Compass with types of companies, which agency data. This is G to B and B to G. These are companies on this side, and their categories: finance and investment, research, food and agriculture, lifestyle, data, tech, and how they use data from federal agencies, and the mapping between those. Very interesting and good undertaking. The question for me in the work that I've been doing, and for us, I think, as citizens, is where does the individual fit in this? Where does the citizen fit in here? And how can this work for me as an individual? Because I think that's the key thing. A lot of that data is about us. And large companies having safe sex with agency data, I don't think is what our fantasy should be. I think that's doing this work is important, but there's another level that we need to get to, which is how do we govern this? Now, Phil Windley, who I showed earlier, made a really interesting point at an O'Reilly conference we did in 2004 that Phil and I helped out with, where he pointed out that government is about two things. Democracy is about two things. One is elections. That's sports. It soaks up lots of attention. But the more mundane side, which is the actual governance, is what gets things done. And that's mostly what the buildings do. It's what the people in the buildings do. They're involved in governance itself. And an interesting point that he made in his very Republican state is that he said, I don't care if you're a survivalist in the woods, you want somebody to fix the streets. Sooner or later, you want somebody to fix the streets. And as a matter of fact, in the UK, the most effective grassroots thing ever done, I think, is something called fixmystreet.com. just one company, the little group called My Society created this thing where you got to post a pothole on your street, and it got published. It was kind of an intent cast, as it were, to the government to fix this thing on the street. So that's a kind of low-level model of governance. I think that, to me, the guiding thing is what Lincoln said, really at the right when industry was winning the Industrial Revolution. You know, that railroads were hot, shipping was hot, blocking ports was a way to do war, wrecking the railroads is a way to do that. And he talked about a new birth of freedom and government by the people, for the people, and of the people, not in order. It's just been burned into our brains since then, but we're not doing that on the internet yet, and we need to. So that's what we need. That's where we need to do that. And so my sort of closing call to you is to wake up. You're each the one. If you're familiar with that movie, he was the one. We are each that guy. We need to have control of this thing. The machine world needs to be ours and not theirs. And I'm wearing this little thing here. This is an example of the Internet of Things at work. Phil's operating system. This thing here has its own operating system. It's not here. It's in its own cloud. And if you scan this QR code, it tells you whether or not it's okay to take my photograph. And it's an example of one thing that we're working on at Customer Commons. It's our logo. It's a spin-off from Project VRM at the Berkman Center. Joyce and I are both involved in it. It's a new nonprofit, but we're working for liberated, powerful, and respected customers, and the same applies to the citizens. And with that, let's talk. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I'm going to take the moderator role. So normally I ask questions, but I actually want someone else to start this time. Robin.
Well, this is like a class, huh?
Yeah. Robin
who's sleeping in the back? Who's on their phone?
She's not new to the team. She is working on privacy.
Okay.
I presume you might have some questions. And Anthony is a big fan. And I just learned that actually he wanted to introduce you, so I apologize for that, but he might have some questions.
Oh, God. I was thinking about the questions that I wanted to ask, so now I'm putting it together a lot faster than I thought I would. I suppose a lot of my questions concern, the content. So right now, even when you're framing it here, it's very much privacy against governments, privacy against.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a number of different contexts for privacy that are actually probably more imminent for everyday citizens than those two contexts.
Mm-hmm.
Because those present threats, but they present threats that happen in the future that aren't completely detected. So, suppose the question becomes, how can we serve individuals who are seeking to protect their privacy from, let's say, employers, potential employers, current employers, friends, family, ways that actually have that also have effects for something like your personal friends, and
I think there are two ways to look at that. One is simple selective disclosure, right? So, and this is something we don't have right now. We don't have any mechanisms many anyway, that allow us to selectively disclose. But another piece is a legal one, or something that's quasi-legal, which says, my disclosures come with permissions. A potential employer, for example, I'm going to let you know these are the 5 places I've worked before, and here's my driver's license, and here's several other things, and here's some people you might talk to. Our understanding is that you will not disclose the following things. There's one of the challenges that we have right now is reversing the really lopsided legal conventions that we have now. We've had what are called contracts of adhesion, which are the standard form contracts that we never look at, that we agree to, we click agree, and they're meaningless. We need meaningful ones that are are normative in a casual way, right? I mean, the truth is, I mean, let's say if you were to go in on an interview with a potential employer, you're a journalist, you interview with the New York Times and Daily News, so you have reasonable confidence that they're keeping whatever you told them to themselves, and they're not going to blab it all over the world. In the online world, we don't have that. It's too easy to share all this stuff. So there needs to be what Lewis Hyde, in a wonderful book called Common as Air. It's about the commons. He says the commons is not completely free. It's stinted, he says. There are sets of understandings we have. You don't have a tragedy of the commons because there's an understanding that you don't build your own factory in the middle of it or overgraze it in some way. There are manners that we have among ourselves. We don't have mechanisms for manners yet online. In many ways, because the internet is so young, it's very poorly developed in the manners department. So it's not just the legal stuff, it's the manners stuff. And how we articulate that, I think, is a wide open field.
Well, it's interesting. To a large extent, I always go back to say, well, why do we care, right? So why do we even care? And we had a little bit of that discussion as well. And to a large extent, because you have one way to think about it is that you care because you act differently if you know that someone knows something about you, right? So the level of autonomy is affected by it to a large extent. And it's very interesting because to a large extent, this whole field of the internet, right, especially at the early stages, was always about this is going to empower individuals.
Yeah.
This is going to provide individuals more autonomy to actually do. And it turns out that actually we actually lost that autonomy to a large extent because we've given up autonomy because we've given up our data. Mm-hmm. And so how do you bring it back in, right? I mean, some would say we've had all this debate. People always say, well, the horse left the barn, right? As if you can. But anyway, the barn apparently.
The genie left the barn.
Yeah. Right. But then and I think that's partly true, right? I mean, I think it's very hard to turn it back. But then and I don't know, and I think I would like to get your opinion about it. But is then the debate not partly about context, but is the debate also not should be about, well, let's at least, collection might be hard to control these days, but at least let's focus on the use, right, which is the other element that I wanted to ask you about. So A, the autonomy question, B, the horse in the barn, and the or the genie.
Genie in the barn. Well, I like the horse and barn one because we don't just have to do agriculture, right? There's we have an early and very poorly developed, lopsided, dysfunctional set of norms right now that at the same time provide amazing and wonderful graces that we all take for granted. And it's really hard to step away from that and see what else can we do here. So I think in the absence of clearly felt harms, most of us aren't that concerned about it. But I also think there's no progress that starts with, let's do this for everybody. Mark Andreessen, the inventor of the graphical browser, basically, and now at VC, in an interview I did with him back in 1998, dropped this line: all technology trends start with technologists. So there are small groups that I think will drive what large groups are going to do. There are small groups that have a set of concerns that are going to drive what large groups do. But the main thing is we need inventions that mother necessity. Right? We need the thing that when you take one look at it, you see, I need that. My favorite example is the smartphone. Smartphones were around for a long time before the iPhone. Right? I mean, some of us had Palms and things. The apps were terrible. You couldn't use them on another one. The BlackBerry was a slight improvement, but if you had a BlackBerry, you got it to do email, and you had it because you worked for a big company. One of my favorite stories, and Joyce, I'm sure, is tired of it at this point, but it's that the first iPhone we got was hers because she saw one and said, I can use that. And she's not a technical pioneer by any stretch, but it was close. You took one look at that and realized, I need that. I need what that does. We didn't have that before, even though the field was around. We need inventions like that. We need inventions that say to us, or to some of us, some small number of us, oh damn, I need that. How can I use that? There are some people like one of my favorites. He used to live here in the city. He lives in D.C. now. His name's Britt Blazer. If he was here in the city, he would have been in this room. He has something called newgov.us, and it's basically a way for each of us to manage our politicians. And he's been working on that UI for 8-10 years. He's trying to make it better. He wants it to be that invention that Mother's necessity. He's getting there. It's not easy, but we have to do it. But Google's not going to do it for us, right? They're not going to do it. Facebook certainly isn't going to do it. It's going to be somebody new. That's why I like Phil Windley and Devin Lafredo, who I showed you. It's people at that level, people that working at the grassroots, but that really know their stuff, that see what needs to be done and are going to make a thing that does it. There's actually a slide I had in another presentation. I didn't put it in this one. That the thing Phil's working on is with cars. Cars are places where we feel independent. Cars are throwing off data all the time, but you never see it. But it goes out of something called the ODB2 port underneath the dashboard. He's got a gizmo you can stick in there and collect all that data for yourself, and then use it in all these substitutable services. He thinks that's the wedge that he needs to drive out there. Now, it might be interesting to think about how you might selectively disclose that to government and make governance better. So let's say there's a way of doing that where I can say, you know what, I'm going to show my car usage data in an anonymous way to whoever wants it. But it's anonymous. I'll make sure it's anonymous. Because I know it's going to improve highway safety, it's going to improve a lot of other things. It may help my local, state, regional government in some way. That's a small thing, but I think these are the kind of paths that we can start thinking toward. But the key thing is to stand on the individual side and see what can be done. Because when you stand on the administrative side, you always stand, and there's a tendency always when looking at government, you're looking at policy. And it's like, as we see with net neutrality right now, it is FUBAR. It is just, there is no right answer there. It's when you all new policy protects yesterday from last Thursday, right? And we're looking at the entire future with this thing. There is, if you're starting with what the phone cable companies can do, you're not going to get to net neutrality. Can't happen. You really have to start. This is Susan Crawford's point, and something she's been vilified for by her friends. I'm like trying to step into the middle of a circular firing squad on this right now, where she says our only hope is really is at the local level, because a city can do what the federal government can't do. And there's real innovation going on there. We think of Google's gigabit city, but there's Lafayette, Louisiana, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and various ones in Utah, North Carolina, and others. And there's a policy side to that too. We want to prevent the phone and cable companies from driving through legislation that prevents those kind of grassroots from happening, which happen in over half the states so far. But at the same time, we really need to work on helping those efforts along. It's kind of a very long-winded answer to several questions. Other questions or remarks?
Sorry, yeah.
You mentioned that you see centralization as related to a lot of those issues that drive towards it. And it's something I think about a lot in a perhaps slightly different way, so I'm just curious for your thoughts on what I'm about to say. I think a lot of times people make things centralized. It feels good to have something centralized, but it's not necessarily beneficial to their I'm thinking like business means. And I see this a lot in software, that people make something centralized because it feels good to have it centralized, even though a distributed thing might be even more efficient and whatever. Does this bring up any thoughts?
Oh yeah, it's centralization is the easy answer, always, and it's not a bad thing. We need our centralized stuff. There's the thing is that there needs to be consciousness of what the negative externalities of those centralized solutions might be. I am sure, in fact, I know for a fact that Google is torn up inside about this. There are people like Vince Cerf who invented TCP/IP, or one of the main inventors of TCP/IP, who's their chief evangelist. He's torn up. He's torn in two ways about it. Well, we need to do advertising because that's our way of making money. At the same time, we need not to do surveillance because that compromises our autonomy. How do you deal with that? And he doesn't publicize that, but that's an issue for them. But they've built their central thing. Something that's closer to home for me is, and I'm not going to name names, but Phil and his colleagues, a small group, have written this operating system for everything. The one that's behind this, and I can put one on this if I want. It will be here and be in its own cloud. And we each can have our own operating system in the cloud that is programmable. It can have code executing on it. We can do whatever we want in it. It can be transferable from this device to another device to another device. But it's not very finished. It's early, right? And there are other developers in our group, it's called VRM, for vendor relationship management, that rather than work on Phil's stuff, have invented their own centralized things because it's easy. It's just, well, I'll just take some code that I know, and I'll just build something that's centralized, and we'll fix it later. And that happens all the time. And there's, and it also ties in with, the geek hacker ethic, which is, I'm the lord of all our survey, and I'm running my own damn server, and I'm in the center of my world, and I don't see any problem beyond that. I'm protected. I've got my whole survivalist kit built out here, and I've got my firewalls up against the world, and I'm centralized. And we have to think in a larger way than that. And I don't know. The short answer is centralization is easy, and we need some of it. But it's very important to understand what the negative externalities of it are and what the positive externalities are of sharing ideas and sharing code and sharing what we can all use and put to use. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the surveillance state and the targeted advertising ecosystem, particularly related to political advertising? 3 years ago was a thing, but now not so much.
All the surveillance we're complaining about now is basically modeled by the advertising business, and including what the NSA is doing. It is not the advertising business. What Mad Men was about, what Madison Avenue was about, was never personal. It was always targeted to groups. You're beer drinkers and you're watching the game. This isn't personal. We want you to know our beer. We want you to like our beer. You drive trucks. Here's a truck. That's brand advertising, and most advertising of all advertising of the traditional sort is not personal, and that is part of what made it valuable. It carried something called an economic signal, and the signal was sufficiency. You may never drink a Budweiser, but you sure know they exist, and that matters in the world. And a couple of years ago, Pepsi decided they were going to drop some of their brand advertising and just do personal advertising on Facebook, and they lost share out of that. That was much. But what's happened is that there's a different thing called direct marketing, which was descended from direct mail, and that is what Google does, and that's what Facebook does, and that's what all this is direct response advertising. It is a different breed. It cares about data deeply. It has always been about data. It's always been about ignoring negative externalities. In other words, we don't care. The logic behind junk mail is you're getting the junk, we get the click-throughs. You respond. That's great. We don't mind cluttering your garbage can. That's okay with us. Litter is fine. And now, pulling those two apart, I think, is a really important thing to do that very few people are doing. Is getting Don Marti, M-A-R-T-I, who's done all the leading thinkers thinking on this, I believe. He's my old editor at Linux Journal. He volunteered to help me out in writing the the attention economy, and helped me in the advertising chapter, and he ran with the ball. He's still running with it. I just handed it over to him because he's just done an amazing job. I give him access to the Harvard Online Library, and he made the most use of it. And his point is that there are these two separate things, and one has to bear in mind the negative costs of the spam business, and that is the spam business. Now, how it pertains to politics, I don't know. I mean, I think if I mean, in the last couple of elections, I made a point of following both Republicans and Democrats. I got junk mail from both just to see what's going on. There's no doubt that during Obama's first and second runs for the White House that they handled it much better than the Republicans did. I think probably they're both about even on this now. But to me, a bigger concern that I have, because the development group that I'm working with is worldwide. And the hottest areas, aside from Utah, which I mentioned, and Respect Networks on the West Coast, and a few companies in Boston and DC and elsewhere, most of the action is going on in the UK, France, in Australia, South Africa. Australia, Joyce and I just came back from Australia a few weeks ago. Hot stuff there. There's much more consciousness about it. There are a number of reasons for this, but the one I want to get to is political. That I think in this country we're in a conceptual logjam of the worst sort, where I listened to an interview, maybe some of you heard of Bob Dole the other day on NPR, where he basically said, without being too blunt about it, he could not be a Senate Majority Leader now because the Republican Party has too many entailments in it that are too hard for him to sign on to. When he was this Majority Leader, the Republican Party was about smaller government and fiscal responsibility and sort of generalized virtues like that. It wasn't about abortion, it wasn't about immigration, it wasn't about the death penalty, it wasn't about hating Obama, it wasn't about any of that stuff. It wasn't about unity at all costs and all that. And at the same time, I think on the left, much as I hate listening to Rush Limbaugh, a lot of what he nails the left for, he's right on. On the left, we tend to look first to government for solving everything. We tend not to understand business at all. And there's this antipathy for that reason between the people who look to policy for the answer and the people who look to business for the answer. When in fact, you go to places like France, where they have high-speed trains, where they can have high-speed trains because government gets along with business. It doesn't here. We don't have high-speed trains. We have a few little examples, every here and there, the Acela will get up to 100 miles an hour, right? But you go to crappy, poorly run countries in Europe like Italy, wonderful place to eat and hang out, but the government doesn't work very well. But damn, the trains are great. The roads are great because there's an understanding there that there's a symbiosis between government and business and society. There's a social contract that's well understood that we used to have here and is gone. So, to get to your point, to your question, all appeals that they're seeing are to partisan biases that have no basis in a larger reality that I understand. Which is that the Republican Party has to be about more than hating Obama and hating Obamacare. The Democratic Party has to be more about social good in a sort of generalized way. There's some sensibility that's missing in here, and I don't even know how to address it exactly. Yes.
Well, this is actually very, very related to what you're saying, but I just wanted to follow up question. So, in terms of privacy, one of the major concerns is actually just protecting vulnerable parties. And when we're thinking about innovation and technologies, they're generally anonymous. So it's one reason why we do look to regulations, so things like California's replacement protect children's privacy, give them the ability to face what they put online was their new custody. Now, obviously, that requires a symbiotic relationship between government and technology because there needs to be technology available to be able to facilitate.
Mm-hmm.
How can we motivate technology companies to gear themselves towards the vulnerable, to work alongside with government to integrate these technologies to support these regulations?
I think you appeal to the small ones, or you create your own. I think trying to get Apple, Google, Amazon, and Facebook to do it is a losing proposition. They all have public-facing departments that do that kind of thing, and some of them actually do work toward some of those ideals. But I think you need to look to the enterprising people, either on the in the public sector or the private sector, to do the heavy lifting there, and to do it in small groups in small places. Everything is an adoption curve, and the adoption curve always starts with something small. I mean, even for that matter, the smartphone. The first smartphone Apple came out with was $600. And even still now, if you look at the actual cost of a phone, like we have T-Mobile, we switched to T-Mobile because T-Mobile works overseas, and you don't have to pay extra for data overseas. It's wonderful. So I had to pay retail for the phone. That phone over there cost $850. That's the real cost for that phone. And that's an elite thing, but yet it's kind of interesting. It started with long lines of people at Apple stores in places like New York and in Palo Alto, but it spread to everybody. Somehow people have made that work. But it started as an elite thing. It started with a relatively small number of people. It was a large small number, but it was relatively small. Any thoughts? I'm sure.
I wanted to say something about the political advertising question. And what I observe is, as it gets better and better, the tracking kind, the junk mail kind, I'm getting more and more annoyed. And so I think what we're doing is we're just looking at, wow, how effective it was the first time. But anything you do the first time is pretty effective, and then the second time is pretty effective too. It's only about like the 100th time, like, forget it, I'm over it. So I think that's not what's been not taking into account. One of the reasons why, when you said it was really a big issue 3 years ago and now it's not a big issue, is I think people are like ignoring it. And what the point that Doc is making about brand advertising is actually so hugely missing. We really want to see what's the big idea the politician has to say. And we don't want him to say it to me individually. We want to know, like, what's your big overriding message? And so I think it's just this moment in time when they have this shiny new toy. Wow, we could tap that guy on the shoulder and say, we're going to fix your driveway. Well, that's cool the first couple times. But I think we just have this moment, and now they're going to have to come up with some new shiny toy, or else go back to what really works, which is saying what your big message is and convincing people that you've got the right idea. Some leadership for the concept. Anyway.
I should add that the most effective advertising for Obama was Shepard Fairey's Hope poster, yeah. I think. And it wasn't done by the campaign, It was done by a guy, a dude from the Rhode Island School of Design. He came up with this thing. So it's something any of us can do.
Well, but it was attached with an idea, right? Which was
right.
Hope, right?
Right.
And I think that was the.
Yeah. Yes.
There's an interesting filter to economic and business history. You were making a very, very salient point how easy centralization is and how it's kind of all of this. But we look at the way centralization happened in the course of the 19th century. It wasn't driven only, or in many cases primarily, by need for scale. In fact, business research argues that centralization typically happens as a function of bridging market failure. So we did this Gale for general, with this plan. But when you have these acts of integration, centralization, it's driven to bridge market failure. That was in many cases that motivated. The reason that applies, strikes me less well today, is that the kinds of markets we were talking about were not infinite and infinitely granular. There were a couple. So if you're a steel company, you're buying a chunk of inputs, and it's pretty straightforward. It's not this thin, dermatological, this slicing and so on. So part of what strikes me in what you're saying is the logic we have historically to understand what drives these forces has now been outpaced by the technological ability to grind this or slice this thinner and thinner and thinner. And I don't know that if you look at the political vocabulary or the culture, it is able to cope with that because it's relying on mechanisms that come from a very different scale world.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to bridge that.
I don't either, and that's one reason why I've been a little bit of an apostate on the subject of net neutrality. You know, because I think, and there is no easy policy answer to that. There just isn't, and especially not when we have, on the one hand, an ability by anybody within these systems that are essentially owned by these giant companies to do what the hell we please, while at the same time they're trying to lock us down. To come up with a single answer, I don't think there is one, and especially, and there's also a very high degree of regulatory capture there. I mean, the phone and cable companies are the zoo animals that run the zoo. You know, they would not know how to operate a fully open marketplace, but they happen to run that marketplace that they have. You know, so boy,
yeah, but there was, at a certain point, at the level of those net neutrality would not be a big issue if you would have competition.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge here, right? Is that you don't have any competition, so that you don't, you basically are locked in whatever default position or default intelligence they seek to use. Then you're in a different position than if you're, anyway, as you said, even with the banking, where you distribute, where you can say, well, I'm not happy here, I'm going to go elsewhere, and I'm going to have a different deal. That seems to be the real debate here, which is not a net neutrality debate, which is a competition debate, which shows why it matters in the U.S. more than elsewhere. Quite often.
Yeah, I'm going to try not to get too far into the weeds on this one, but there is a kind of consensus among the people who know the most about this that the only answer is what they call structural separation. In other words, the freight carriers, and same with container cargo, the freight carriers have nothing to say about what goes in the containers. They're not going to try and bias one container over another based on what's in it. We have structural separation in other parts of the world, and we don't have it in the U.S. We would have it if we made the internet a telecommunications service rather than an information service, which is what I was considered right now. And yet, it is also considered an absolute political impossibility because all of the entire Republican Party would go up in arms and say, you're just trying to kill off big business. You're trying to make them all dumb pipes, not realizing that in fact there is far more business to be had with their first mover advantages and all the other things they can do besides what they have the pipes for. But it's, they're almost every conversation I've seen is stopped with that, short of doing that because it's considered politically impossible. Though there is somebody, Barbara Van Schowick, wrote a piece at Stanford about a week ago, in which she said, that's not quite true. There's a new generation of people in Washington that don't quite line up the same way, especially a lot of people in the bureaucracies that might be ready to act on this. I don't know. It's my own feeling is, and then toward your question, what can be done? I think Susan Crawford's right that the grassroots place to do something is at the municipal level. It's not if Wilson, North Carolina, can become an attractor for business and an attractor for schools and smart people and university departments and whatever else because they've got gigabit connectivity, that's the new beachfront, right? And that's a way that a small town, Wilson was a tobacco auction town. when I lived in North Carolina, which I did for 20 years, Wilson was entirely a tobacco town. Well, now it's becoming very different, and it's because they have really high-speed internet there, which, by the way, the state of North Carolina all but outlawed because of lobbying from the phone and cable companies. Crazy stuff.
Well, it's interesting. I don't want to go there because that's
Yeah.
it depends. Do you believe industrial policy should happen at the national level? If you link it with industrial policy, or is it indeed at the local level, and then you hope that by having some kind of local committee? Yeah, to a large extent, I agree with Susan on that as well, especially in the OPED level. But it's I do believe that there are objectives at the national level that needs to be. But anyway, that's a different neutrality debate. Ken, you've been silent, so you might have.
You're in the back of the class. Say something.
I chose that position very deliberately. I had a crazy day today.
All right, sorry for it.
But and I missed a lot of what you said, so I'm going to ask a question you already addressed. We'll make something up.
You can also pose a question.
Yeah.
Oh, you can just say something.
Well, I got to ask a question. Are you seeing any emerging technologies? I heard you mention Phil. And I'm not aware of that well. But I'm wondering if you're seeing any emerging technologies that we should know of that are like sort of in the lab stage that offer the possibility of much effective, direct community democratic engagement at a local level in a way that is not now considered. Because I know there are a number of different experiments along these lines over the years. You see some, you don't see some prototypes and stuff. Nothing ever really taken off. But there's a lot of creativity around these questions, around how do you get people to engage at local level and community decision making. I'm wondering if you might be seeing
well, two answers there. One is, I am sure you will see a lot of that at the Personal Democracy Forum, which is going to be here in June. Every June it is, which Mika Sifri and Andrew Shea put on every year. But the other is, I mentioned him earlier, is what Britt Blazer has been doing with newgov.us. One of my favorite fighters against phone and cable companies, but also has been an attorney for them, is a guy named Eric Cecil in Colorado. And he used Britt's service, his technology at newgov.us to help organize at a grassroots level what he did there. That's a story that has yet to be written because it's all the good and bad guys are not the ones you necessarily expect that they would be. There's a case where, just very briefly, the stimulus money went politically to the connected, who then used it to overbuild fiber where local communities had already built their own. And it also tended to ignore the rural towns, or if it did not ignore them, it overbuilt on them. And some of them were actually called rural telcos. And some of them were in some ways allied with the big telcos. It was really hard to draw a line between, the one obvious bad guy in a way was actually the Obama administration, who Eric, hardcore Democrat, heavy agitator for Obama in 2 elections, ended up again, fighting the feds on this one because the money was so poorly distributed. But even there, it was complicated. But my point though is that it's partly it's a collaboration tool, and partly it's a way, as he puts it, as Rick puts it, he designed it this way. It's a way for citizens to manage their representatives, and that's not just the people you elect, but also the bureaucrats that you employ. So for every small municipality, I think even across the country, he's got a database of who's who that you can use your position on this thing to manage in some way.
The essence of it is that everybody that has a comment is actually a voter in that district. So that and it goes all the way down to district level, and I think he's got the whole country. It's like 800 some odd websites, every state, every large city mayor, and so that if there a comment comes on there, it's somebody that's voting for you. You as a politician, you're able to see exactly what the interests are because it's a verified address. That's like the essence of why it's an amazing tool, because if 100 people are saying something to you in a district of only a couple thousand, and they're vocal, you might want to pay attention to them. So it's able to use for very local things, but he's also got a plan to scale up, and all the infrastructure is in any local community that has an issue that wants to use this. He's all about helping. That's why they were able to use it in Colorado.
But this says newgov.us.
Yeah.
Yeah. NEWGOV.
Great. With that, I suggest we close, and thanks, Doc, for a stimulating and somewhat provocative kind of presentation that enforces our beliefs in that it's up to us to make a difference.
I'm afraid it is.
So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's so I would love to find out more. So I didn't want to capitalize on it. So customer comments. So what's the value proposition?